Thank all of you who are here. I'm not able to see each of you, but I do want to say some of your names. Jalen, I'm glad to see you. Ruben, Robert, uh, Renato, Muhammad, Martin, Margie, all of you. Langston, Jose, Jill, Jessica, all of you who are here, DJ and Derek and Damien and Brett, and even those of you whose names I didn't call. My only disappointment is that I'm not there with you, not only because I love California so much. I told some of the staff before we started that I've lived in California on a few different occasions for about 6 years of my life in two different times. And we love California and really see it as a second home for us in a lot of ways. And so, not only because I love coming to California, but there's always something powerful and profound about being in the room with people and being able to look people eye to eye, face to face, heart to heart. And I look forward, I think this time next year, um, we'd be able to be in person, maybe even in 6 months or 12 months. I think I see some light at the end of the tunnel with this pandemic. And that's saying a lot because our nation has lost nearly 600,000 people. I saw just this morning that I think it was 9% of America's children lost at least one parent. And just like a crazy number. And people have lost mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, sisters and brothers. And as you all know, the pandemic is not the only thing we're up against. Many of you may have seen over the past few hours that the rapper DMX just passed away. And it's not, we will all pass away. And that's not the tragedy in and of itself. The tragedy is just that we know he struggled. He struggled with pain and trauma and abuse from his past that he struggled to shake. He struggled with substance abuse. And for any of you who maybe struggled with it yourself or have a loved one who struggled with it, it's not something that you can sometimes just shake with determination. It needs support, and it just breaks my heart. He has a family and so many people who loved him and relied on him, and so uh, it's a painful time. We're also today right in the middle of this trial of Officer Derek Chauvin, who effectively led the lynching of a black man named George Floyd. And for me, George Floyd is not just a news story. One of my good friends. Well, before we move on, and I have a couple personal stories that I want to share with each of you, and a major lesson that I want to teach before we go. Um, I wanted to acknowledge this week that we are in the trial of an officer named Derek Chauvin, who effectively led the lynching of a black man in broad daylight. And that's not hyperbole. What they did to George Floyd, and I, because of what I do for a living, I've had to watch most of the trial. What they did to George Floyd was just a modern day lynching. That's all it was. And for me, I have taken this trial very personally because one of my dear friends, Steven Jackson, who is um, uh, a former NBA player and now a leader, Steven and George were as close as brothers. And in fact, a lot of people, they were so close, a lot of people thought they were brothers. And they grew up in the same town outside of Houston. And they were close up until, they were in communication with each other up until the week before George was murdered. And this is not just a news story, but this trial gets to the root of a very difficult question. Will people be finally held responsible for these acts of violence? Because in Los Angeles and in California, what I know is if you are Black or Latino in particular, and you commit any crime, nobody is held more responsible for crimes that are committed and sometimes held responsible for crimes they didn't even commit than African Americans and Latinos, particularly in California. And nobody has been held less responsible for their crimes in California than police, not just in Los Angeles, but from deep in San Diego all the way up to Sacramento and beyond. And so this trial, it's not just about justice, because I want to linger here just for a moment before we really get started. Justice, justice would be George Floyd being alive. And we know that that can't happen. And here, let me illustrate it for you. If you've ever seen the statue of the scales of justice, when George Floyd was murdered, it imbalanced the scales of justice. And what I want you to understand is that even if this officer is found guilty, that doesn't balance the scales. This man is still murdered. I know that because I've walked families through this. What we're fighting for with this officer is not so much as justice. If he's found guilty, that's accountability. And that makes it a little closer. George Floyd's family was given a financial settlement. That doesn't make it balanced. I've spoken to George's family. They would trade all that money back for him being alive. It might balance it a little bit more. But justice would mean these scales are balanced, and that's not where we are. What we're fighting for in this case is really accountability. We want this man who led the murder, the lynching of George Floyd, we want him to be held accountable. We say justice. We say we want justice for George Floyd, and that's not bad. But in this case, the most we could get would not be justice, it would be accountability. Justice would mean finding a smarter way to balance those scales. I don't know that you can ever bring the scales balanced head to head after you murder a man the way they did George Floyd. Those scales are going to be in balance for the rest of our lives, but we have to try to balance them out. And I wanted to just acknowledge this moment that we're in today with the death of DMX in the middle of a pandemic where we can't even meet face to face the way we normally would, in the middle of this trial that I think is probably the most important trial at the intersection of race and racism and policing since a trial that happened 30 years ago, almost to this day, in Los Angeles, when 4 police officers were arrested for the brutal beating of a man named Rodney King. And that was before Twitter, before Facebook, before Instagram. And the entire country, but particularly Los Angeles and California, knew that these officers were guilty of a crime. And it was the first viral video of police brutality. And it went viral in an old school way. This was before people even had cell phones. A man who was 2 blocks away filmed it on his camcorder. And it was clearly a crime. But all 4 officers were still acquitted. And many of you who are watching, you weren't born yet. But people forget that over 100 people died in the aftermath of that acquittal because the pain and the disappointment and the anger were so severe that it really was uncontrollable. The only thing that could have controlled it is if Los Angeles had tried to balance those scales and they failed. And so people acted out in anger. And I said 2 weeks ago, that is what will happen if the men who killed George Floyd are not held accountable and they are determined to leave these scales horribly imbalanced. If they don't try to bring them closer, we'll be back in that moment that we were in 30 years ago, because the man clearly committed a crime and needs to be held to account. So we're in this painful moment. And I wanted to talk to you to share a real transparent story with you. I wanted to earn your trust. I want to admit a mistake that I've made for years and tell you what I've learned from that mistake with the hope that you can learn from it. Now, here's what I know, and it frustrates me. Most of us don't learn the deepest lessons in life. Most of us don't learn those on Zoom. I wish we did. I wish that's how, I wish the deepest lessons were learned from books. I read books. I wish they were learned from articles. I read articles. I wish they were learned from college. I've been to college. I have an undergraduate and a master's in history. I want you to earn your degree. But the truth is, the painful truth is, most lessons are learned from mistakes that we've made. At the very least, most lessons are learned from real life experiences. So, my hope and my prayer is that you will learn from my experience and not make the same mistake that I made, because it took years for me to figure out how to solve and, in some ways, repent for this mistake. In 2014, I was actually living in Southern California. I worked for an environmental charity in Los Angeles called Global Green. And it was a good job. Many of you who are working right now know the difference between your dream job and just a job. And so it was a job. It paid some of the bills. It wasn't horrible, but it wasn't what I dreamed for myself. But I showed up every day, and day in and day out, I went to do the work. And one day in July of 2014, 7 years ago, that morning, I got a Facebook message from a friend of mine who knew me from college. And when I was a student in college, I went to Morehouse College in Atlanta, a school for Black men in Atlanta. And when I was a student there, I was very much an activist, different than I am now. Obviously, I was a teenager, but I was so dedicated to activism that I literally owned my own bullhorn and megaphone and PA system. And when I was a student in 1999, I was student government president at Morehouse. And a young man who was almost my age named Amadou Diallo, you should Google this when you can, was shot and killed, shot 41 times by the NYPD. Now, again, you got to go back in time with me. There was no Twitter. There were no trending topics. There was no Facebook or Instagram or YouTube. It took us about a week. News traveled much slower. It took us about a week after Amadou was killed before we even heard about it. And for many of us, the murder of Amadou Diallo in 1999 was for us what the murder of George Floyd is for you, what the murder of Breonna Taylor is for you, what the murder of Ahmaud Arbery or Philando Castile or others may be for you. And we marched, we protested, we demonstrated, but it was my first hard lesson in fighting for something and not getting it. All of the officers, Amadou was unarmed, nonviolent, broke no laws. He was a beautiful, wonderful human being with a tremendous soul, had never broken a law a day in his life, was hardworking, from a family of privilege, and they still shot and killed him. He pulled out his wallet to show them his ID, which is what he was trained and thought he needed to do. And they claimed that they thought when he pulled his wallet out that it looked like a gun. And every officer who shot this man, they shot 41 shots. Every officer who shot this man was acquitted. And it was my first painful lesson in something that I want to teach you today, that you can put your heart and soul into fighting for something and not get it. That was the first time that had happened to me on that level. 15 years later, I'm at my desk in Los Angeles, and a buddy of mine that I went to Morehouse with sent me a message And it's weird because that message, he had no idea that that message would change the entire direction of my life. That message had a link to a video on YouTube. And in 2014, there had never been a video of someone being killed by police. Rodney King 30 years ago was beaten by the LAPD, but he survived. It changed and ruined his life in many ways. But there had never been a viral video of someone being killed by police. And when my friend sent me this video, it was of a man here in New York who was choked to death in a way very similar to what they did to George Floyd. We didn't even know the man's name yet. And he described the video for me and was like, Shaun, what can you do about this? And when I first saw him ask me that, like I was just at my cubicle. I was living a very different life. I was no longer really an activist. I still cared about police brutality, but it wasn't what I was fighting for or against at that point. I was focusing a lot of my time and energy on being a father. I had 5 young kids, on being a husband. And I clicked on the link, and it was just as my friend described. It was the man that we came to know as Eric Garner, literally being choked to death by an NYPD officer named Daniel Pantaleo. And I can't explain to you how I processed it any way better than this. I had never seen a man die before, not in real life. I've seen people die in movies, but this was real, and that had never been shown before. This was a man who was living, breathing, talking, and doing nothing that even warranted being arrested. And police officers literally choked the life out of this man. And I saw him die. And when my brain saw it, my brain processed it almost as if I saw it in person. And I remember seeing it thinking like, excuse my language, like, oh shit, like I just saw a man be murdered. And I panicked. And I just thought like, oh, again, 7 years later, we've now seen a lot of people be killed on video. But in 2014, none of us had seen that. And I just felt like I got to do something about this. In the following weeks, I came to know Eric Garner's mother, his wife, his children. His daughter Erica became a dear friend of mine. We campaigned all over the country together for Bernie Sanders in 2016. Erica herself, and it breaks my heart, Erica died as a 29-year-old fighting for justice for her father. Literally, her heart gave out. And I said something to the family of Eric Garner. And a few weeks later, a teenage boy named Michael Brown was killed. And I said this to the family of Michael Brown. In Los Angeles, there was a young man named Ezel Ford who was killed. In just a week later, the same day, there was a man named John Crawford who was shot and killed by police at a Walmart in Ohio. And I said something to many of these families that I have since come to deeply regret. And I meant it when I said it. I had no ill intention. I did not think that I was overpromising something that I couldn't deliver. I had been a pastor myself for many years. I've been a pastor for almost 15 years. And I wanted to say something that would soothe the souls of these families. And so I said to family after family, hold on, hang in there. Hold on, hang in there. Don't worry. We're going to get justice for your family. Hold on, hang in there. We're going to get justice for your family. And it never occurred to me that all of these families I was working with, the family of Eric Garner, the family of Michael Brown, the family of John Crawford, the next year, a teenage boy named Freddie Gray was killed. A young woman named Sandra Bland was killed. The next year, a man named Philando Castile was killed. And I said to these families, hold on, hang in there. We're going to get justice for your family. Why did I say that? I said it because I thought in my heart and soul and in mind, I thought we would get justice or accountability, however we want to define it. And I worked in 2014, 2015, and 2016 with nearly 100 different families. Not 10 of them, not 5 of them, not 2, not a single one of those families got even a semblance of justice. In fact, in most cases, the officers weren't even fired. Rarely did it ever even go to trial. It wasn't like these cases went to trial like we're experiencing now with the officers who killed George Floyd. It didn't even go that far. And I wasn't the only person who told these families, don't worry, we will get justice. But when I said it, I meant it. And we didn't get justice for any of those families, none. Not the family of Eric Garner, not the family of Michael Brown. I told my own family when Philando Castile was shot and killed as his fiance filmed it on Facebook Live. I told my family he was a beautiful soul. He was the cafeteria supervisor at a local Montessori school, and he had memorized the names of every child rather, who attended the school. Not only did he know their names, every day they would come in and out of the school, he would say their names, give them a high five, but at lunch, he would monitor the cafeteria. He memorized the food allergies of every student in the school. They loved him. Each of us probably can think of someone like Philando Castile that worked in a cafeteria or worked as a security guard at the front room or whatever it is, who we just loved. He was that guy. Kids brought him presents for Christmas because they loved him. He worked there for 15 years and they shot and killed him, and it was filmed. He broke no law. And I told my own family, this is the case that we will get justice for. This is the case. And still, the officer who killed Philando was still not held accountable. And in 2016, it sent me, there's nothing wrong. I think I've been depressed many times over my life. I wouldn't say it sent me into a depression, but whatever a half a step above depression is where I was. It sent me spiraling down, trying to figure out, are we doing something wrong here? I knew that we weren't wrong to march. I knew that we weren't wrong to protest or demonstrate. No, those things aren't wrong. Our heart was right. I knew we weren't wrong to have petitions. I knew we weren't wrong to have tweets or Facebook posts or Instagram posts, but nothing we did worked. And in 2016, it sent me down a path to figure out, how do we do something that actually works? How can we change the equation such that when we put our heart and soul and body and brains and networks and experience, when we put everything we have into fighting for something, how can we build an equation that at least gives us a chance at success? And that's what I want to talk with you about. I traveled to 47 states searching for this answer. As far north as Alaska, I traveled to almost every county in California. I traveled deep in the heart of Mississippi and everywhere in between. I spoke at over 200 college campuses. I was in almost 250 American cities trying to answer one question: how do we actually make change? How is change made? And I want to give you the answer. And I want you to understand that each of you who are here, um, and I'm looking at the names of all the attendees, including Anthony and Alex and Alberto and Chris and Christian, all of you, these answers that I'm about to give you aren't just for fighting back against police brutality. It's about figuring out, how do you change problems in the world? How do you solve problems and build the change for them? It could be there at your university, it could be in your hometown, in your neighborhood, on your block, in your family. How do you fight for something and actually get it? Okay? There are four things that you need. And the beautiful news is that the first three, you don't even need a budget for. The first three, any one of you here, you have everything you need today to start these first three. So there's no need to even worry about the fourth one yet, because you have to really do these in order. The first thing that you need to make change is both beautiful and deceptive. And you'll see why I say that in just a moment. It's beautiful. The first thing is beautiful because we already have it. The first thing that you need to make change is you need people. And let me be real. People doesn't mean hundreds. It doesn't mean thousands. There are 38 of us here right now. We've got people here. You need people, and they need to be highly energized. The first thing that you need to change a problem, to solve a problem, is you need people, and they need to be highly energized. Energy can be anger, frustration, it can be optimism, it can come out of pain, energy can come out of your faith, it can be determination. To change, to make change, you need people, and they need to be highly energized to solve the problem. Now, what's beautiful is we always have that. Like, we almost always have energized people. What's deceptive about it is often when you get energized people together in a march, in a protest, in a room, in a club, when you get energized people together, it makes you think you are a lot closer to change than you really are. That's what's deceptive about it. So, over the past 7 years, there have literally been tens of thousands of marches for the Black Lives Matter movement. There was a march called the Women's March, where millions of women marched. There have been marches for climate change, marches against gun violence. And I don't have any critique of those marches. None. I've participated in most of them. But there's something about millions of people marching that makes you think you are a lot closer to solving the problem than you really are. You need people. Listen to me. You need people, and they need to be highly energized, but that's just the start. Here's the best way I could explain it. If you've ever baked a cake or you've seen somebody make a cake, imagine if you put flour in the bowl, no water, no milk, no eggs, no sugar, no flavor, no color, just flour, and said, here's the cake. Like, imagine if, I don't know if you've ever done this, imagine grabbing a handful of the flour and trying to eat it as if it was cake. When you have energized people, that's just the flour. It's the first, it's the base ingredient to how change is made. It's not change. Having energized people. There was a march this past summer in Los Angeles after George Floyd was murdered, where hundreds of thousands of people showed up. Many of you may have been there. It was one of the biggest marches for civil rights in the history of Los Angeles. But energized people alone, that's not change. It's not even, a bowl of flour is not even close to being a cake. It's a core ingredient of the cake, but a bowl of flour is so far away from being a cake that thinking it's the cake or almost the cake, we know that's wrong. But there's something about having a dozen or 20 or 50 or 100 or 1,000 energized people that makes us think we're much closer to change than we really are. So I want you to know you need people and they need to be highly energized, but it's just the first step. It's not the 10th step. It doesn't mean you're almost there. It's just the base ingredient. The second thing that you need people and they need to be energized. The second thing is that you need people and they need to be deeply organized. Often we're highly energized, but poorly organized. Now, the answer is not to bring the energy down. We need our energy up here. The answer is to bring the quality of our organizing up here. I'm going to ask you all to participate in the chat in just a second as an illustration. Here's what I mean when I say we need to be deeply organized. There are 38 of us here, and I need you to open up the chat if you can, because I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, okay? This is for the panelists and the attendees. Here's how I mean when I say deeply organized. It's not enough to get people's email addresses. It's not enough to get people's phone numbers. Those are tools. Here's how, say the 38 of us wanted to solve a problem together. Here's what I would do. I would ask the 38 of you to tell me one skill you have that you have worked hard to develop that you think might be helpful in a civil rights problem that we're trying to solve. It could be writing, it could be organizing, it could be speaking, it could be art, it could be that you are great at cooking, it could be think for a moment, and I want you to say it in the chat for me. I just want to illustrate this for a second. Right now, to me, you all may know each other, but I don't know you. To me, you're 38 strangers. So Vince said coordinating. George said speaking. Chris said writing. Thank you, Chris. Jill said networking. Maurice said acting. Lorenzo said he's a good public speaker. Anna, sorry if I mispronounced it, said that your network is extensive. No, that's valuable. And you're going to see how valuable it is in just a second. Martin says something that I love. Martin said listening. That's great, Martin, because if we were all speakers, but nobody was listening, what good does it do? Damien says strategy. Someone said research and writing. Christian, this is great, Christian. Christian says being cautious. That's great, Christian, because I don't have that. And somebody needs to be able to say, hold on, everybody, let us look at every angle. Brett said critical thinking. Dr. Nathan said teaching the youth. We have supporting and troubleshooting. We have collaborating. So listen, suddenly, instead of youth empowerment, Jessica says, suddenly, instead of being 39 strangers, we are 39 people who say, you know what? Let's put our skills together and figure out how to solve a problem with the skills we have. And here's the thing, if you don't ask this question, so Jessica said youth empowerment. Well, and so did Dr. Nathan. So all of a sudden we have two people who feel that they have a skill that they've developed working with young people. But what if I all of a sudden ask them to do the acting and the writing? Well, it's not that they're not good at acting or writing, but if they have a skill for youth, I need to figure out how to organize them to do that. Well, what if I asked the person who said they were cautious to be the speaker? That may not be, that may not work. It could, but it may not. It's good to be highly energized, but we have to say, how can we be more deeply organized? Here's another question, and let me see who said. Two of you said something that's going to be very relevant. Someone said that your network is extensive, and Jill also said networking. So the first thing, if I wanted to deeply organize this group, and I mean this in real life, if I said, listen, I want the 38 of us to solve a problem together. The first thing I would do is ask us all to identify our skills so that we can do something that uses our human resources. The second thing I would ask is this. Again, we're talking about being deeply organized. The second thing I would do is say, name 5 people that you think if you ask them to help, and I'm talking about you asked them face to face and said, listen, I've never asked you to do anything for me in my life, but I'm gonna need your help with something. If I asked each of you to find 5 people who you think would say yes if you ask them, all of a sudden, we each know our skills. So we're 38 deep now with skills. But if I ask each of you to find 5 people to ask, not 10, not 50, just 5. It could be relatives, it could be neighbors, colleagues. Do you think you could find 5 people if it was an emergency? Jalen, could you find 5 people? Alberto, could you find 5 people? Answer me in the chat. If your life depended, Alberto said easily. Not 55, but Tony said, yeah, I could do that. Terrell, Jalen said yes. Yeah, easy call. Jill said it's done. So get this. All of a sudden, instead of being 38 deep, now multiply 38 by 5, we would then be over counting the 38 of us plus each of the 5 people we will find. Instead of being 38 deep, we're now more than 200 people deep. Do you understand how if I said, listen, Jessica, Lorenzo, let's not talk about it, let's be about it. I need you to put the names and phone numbers down of the people, the 5 people that you're going to find. Go ahead and find them. All of a sudden, instead of us being 38 deep and just being strangers, we're now 200 plus deep and we know each other's skills. Now, I did that as an illustration to show you, and it took us a few minutes, that with a few minutes of effort, we can not just be highly organized, we can be, highly energized, we can be deeply organized as well. But we're not that organized. We're often highly energized, very poorly organized. And I want you to understand, all of you, that we have everything we need right now to be highly energized and deeply organized. I could give you 10 more ways that we could be deeply organized, and they're all free. We often say, I would be deeply organized if I had $1,000. I would be deeply organized if we had a budget. Doesn't take a budget. It does not take a budget to be highly energized or deeply organized. The third thing also doesn't take a budget. And I want to press this third thing. Let me know in the chat if you understand step 1, step 2. Highly energized, deeply organized. Let me know. I want to make sure you understand it. Good. The third thing that you need is you need a plan that is as detailed and sophisticated and nuanced as the problem you're trying to solve. Now, if you're highly energized, what I'm about to say is painful, and I know because I've done it. If you are highly energized and deeply organized, but don't have step 3, the plan, you will still fail. I've done it. I have failed flat on my face. I have failed so badly. It's literally on my Wikipedia page. If you Google my name, when I fail, it trends on Twitter, right? Like when I have failed, it wasn't because I wasn't highly energized. It wasn't even because I wasn't deeply organized. But if you have those 2 things and you don't have a plan that meets the moment, if you don't have a plan that's as sophisticated and nuanced and specific as the problem, you will still fail. Now, I don't mean that as an insult to you. It's the nature of how change works. And let me tell you how I learned. In traveling to those 47 states, I met with hundreds of activists and organizers and students and staff and professors, and I asked them over and over again to share with me. I had no motive here. I said, share with me your plan to solve the problems that you've been talking with me about. I would say to them, just like I just said, share, tell me about your plan. And I wasn't trying to set them up for failure. I just wanted to hear it. I wanted to learn about it. I would say 95% of the time, when I would ask leaders, good leaders, who were energized and organized, when I would ask them to share their plan with me, let me tell you what they would almost always say. Instead of giving me their plan, they would describe in beautiful, sometimes heartbreaking, meticulous detail. They would detail for me the problem. And I would listen and absorb it and even go back and forth as they explained the problem. Sometimes because they'd experienced the problem themselves. Sometimes they were victims of the problem. It wasn't something abstract that they had only heard about. And I would wait for them to share the plan. And I realized that they had really confused the problem with the plan. Knowing the problem, I mean, knowing it well, can help you craft the plan, but knowing the problem is not a plan. Like, let me illustrate it. I'm on the second floor right now of our house, and underneath me is the kitchen. My kids are always dropping food. I have 5 kids. If one of the kids dropped a plate of food on the ground and they saw the plate of food and now the food is splattered everywhere, and say the plate broke and now there's glass everywhere, and we have a dog who would want to come over there and eat the food, knowing that the food is on the ground, knowing that the plate is shattered, knowing that it's there is not a plan to solve it. It's there. That's not going to solve it. What's the plan? The plan has to be everybody back up before you step on this. You're going to step on something that's going to hurt yourself. The plate is broken. It's dangerous. Everybody get away. Let me grab a broom. Let me get some paper towels. The two of you come over here and help. Let's all get this together. And when we're done, let's mop it and sweep it and wipe it and get it done and throw it in the trash. And because the plate is broken, we don't want the plate to break the bag. Let's also take the bag out, put the bag in another. That's a plan. Seeing the problem, knowing the problem, living through the problem is not a plan. And often, when you are energized and organized and you know the problem, but don't have a plan that will actually solve it, what happens is the problem bulldozes over your plan or your lack of plan. Let me say something that may be simultaneously encouraging and discouraging. Most of the problems that we want to solve are actually really complex. We often want to reduce our problems to something as basic as racism or bigotry. Now, racism is real, bigotry is real, white supremacy is real, poverty is real. But knowing those things, racism is not the only cause of police brutality. Poverty is not the only cause of police brutality. In fact, in the United States, we have 1 million police officers, we have tens of millions of policies and laws. The problem of police brutality, racism is a part of it, but it's actually a problem that's really complex. And I need us to understand that having an understanding of the problem can help you craft the plan, but the problem and the plan are not the same thing. You have to have a plan that can trace how it will solve the problem. You need energized people. You need organized people. You need a sophisticated plan to solve the problem. And here's the beauty. If you get those three things moving in the same direction, you will solve some problems. The last thing you need is this. And if you get this thing working together with energized people, organized people, sophisticated plan, it doesn't mean you will solve every problem, but it means you will have a chance. You will have a fighting chance to solve every problem that you go after. The last thing that you need resources that will allow you to do these things the best they can be done. Now, when I say resources, say say the 43 of us who are here decide to solve a problem on campus with the university. Not a problem in all of Los Angeles. Say we try to solve a problem that's just in one department at the university. We won't need $1 million. I don't even think we would need $100,000. But if the 38 of us, or now the 43 of us, all gave $5, and the five people we found gave $5, instead of us being broke, all of a sudden we have about $2,500. All of a sudden we could, with $2,500, we could probably build a website. We could probably get graphic designs and get flyers. We could probably even produce a grassroots video. I mean, if we thought those things would solve the problem. With $2,500, we could probably buy ads on Facebook and Instagram. I'm talking about, I'm not talking in the abstract. I'm saying if each of us just gave $5, like I asked you again, if it was an emergency, could you give $5 to an emergency? Do you think you could convince five people to give $5 if it was an emergency? Not 50, not 500, but five. And if each of us did that, all of a sudden, thanks, Jessica. If all of us did that, all of a sudden, we have a few $1,000s to then help us magnify our efforts. Let me close with this thought. Part of why I haven't lost hope is because most of our problems are real problems. Sometimes our problems have seen energized people, and that's all they saw. They didn't see organized people with a sophisticated plan and the resources to solve it. They just saw energized people. Sometimes our problems just have people throw money at them, but no real plan, no people, no energy. Most of our deepest problems have not seen all four of these things: energized people, organized people, a sophisticated plan, and resources. Most of our problems, whatever you want to call the problem, haven't seen all four of these problems, all four of these solutions, rather, thrown at them at the same time. That's why I still have hope. If I looked at all of our problems and we had thrown all four of these things at the same time at each of our problems and they didn't budge, I'd be discouraged. That's not what we have, though. And I want you to understand, each of you, that you don't, please, don't start at the resource step. Get energized people together. And if it's 5 energized people, that's fine. If it's 15, if it's 50, that's fine. But get energized people and begin to organize yourselves deeply and then craft a plan. And what I have found is when you get these three things together, the resources are easier at the very least. But often we try to skip past one of these steps and then get discouraged because we don't have any resources. Do these first three things first, and you'll be on the path of solving many of these problems. So listen, thank you for giving me the time and space to try to break down practically how you can solve the problems that we're facing. Because here's what I know: the problems are going to keep coming, the pain is going to keep coming, the crises that we see in our country, in Los Angeles, in California, it's going to keep coming. So we have to be prepared to throw these four things at them. And I want each of you to understand that right now, you have everything you need to start. You don't have everything you need to finish. Don't worry about how you're going to finish. Just worry about what it's going to take for you to get started.